Hi everyone. I'm Shannon Hollis. I'm the Head of Commercial Audio at Newscast, which is the News Corp podcast division. You might know us for podcasts like The Teacher's Pet and Teacher's Trial, a pretty small podcast from Hedley Thomas. You might also know us for I Catch Killers with Gary Jubelin or the Matty Johns podcast. But today we're joined by two panellists. You would have heard of the podcast Healthy-ish, which is our health and wellness podcast from Body and Soul. It's had 6.6 million downloads since it launched and one of our most popular amongst our advertisers. It's hosted by Felicity Harley, who joins us today. Welcome, Fliss.
Thanks, Shan. Hi, everyone.
We're also joined by Polly Blankenship. Polly is the Head of Acquisition for APAC for Audible, and she's responsible for driving subscriptions to Audible. Thanks for joining us, Polly. The three of us are here to talk today about using integrated podcast advertising to drive engagement. It's about reaching audiences that are harder to reach. And the reason that the two of the panellists are here today is because Polly ran a great campaign with us for Audible across 8 of our podcasts, one of our biggest recent campaigns. And Fliss is going to talk about integrating advertisers into her podcast, Healthy-ish. We've got a number of questions, so we'll get started. So first of all, Polly, podcast advertising is really carving a niche when it comes to that intimate listening experience with our audience. What are some things you consider when creating your advertising messaging at Audible?
First of all, I'm looking at my face on my LinkedIn profile photo, which I think needs an update. So I think I'm not going to say anything that probably most of the people in this room already know, but it's a good reminder to, when we think about why we advertise in podcasts, it's really to tap in to the audience of the host themselves. And so 9 times out of 10, they probably know that audience much better than we do. And so I think in this instance, we had an original script, which wasn't the script that we ended with, which is okay, because I think we really looked for input from the hosts themselves. We went with a bunch of titles that we wanted to promote and gave the hosts the opportunity to select the ones that really spoke to them. I think in the example with Felicity, you spoke about in the live reads. You spoke about using Audible when you were going on a run. You also chose the Resilience Project to talk about, and I think there was a nice moment in the advertising itself where you mentioned that Hugh was a mate of your. You said Hugh's my mate, and then you said, "Oh, actually, I can't claim that he's a mate of my husband's." And that wasn't necessarily in the script, but it made it really authentic for the audience that was listening to that advertising. So we really try to be flexible and give the host some creative license.
Yeah, we try to ad-lib quite a lot in the ads that we create across all of our podcasts. We find that it gives the most authenticity and the best experience, not just for the listener, but also for the advertiser. Fliss, question for you. All of our ads are read by our hosts at News Corp, including for your podcast, Healthy-ish. Lots of ads and it's very in demand. Can you tell us why integrating ads so seamlessly into the content is so important?
Yeah, firstly, I'd like to say how amazing a podcast. They just get in your ears. They become part of your life. I'm a big fan of a podcast called Rich Roll, obviously after my own. And I listen to him all the time. And seriously, my husband says, have we got another person in our marriage? Because I feel like you buy into them, you know you just feel like you intimately know the host. And I think this goes a long way in building the trust with the brand. I've worked in media for 20 years. I worked across magazines for many years, ran women's health, went over to digital, and now in podcasting. And I have never worked on a brand or in a medium that I feel like my audience just truly connects with what I'm talking about, the feedback, the numbers, and it all just speaks for itself. I just wanted to quickly talk about an example further to your example, that we ran an ad with My DNA, which is, I don't know if anyone's done that. Basically, you take a mouth swab and they test your DNA, and then you send it off. They come back with various things about your health, your body. I highly recommend it if anyone wants to give it a go. I'm not paid by them, by the way. But they came to us and they said, do you want to give it a go? And I'm up for anything. And I was like, okay, sure, let's give it a go. And I gave it a go, and it was amazing. It has changed many things. In many ways, I attack my health and wellness, but then when we created the ads, I was like, no, let's put this little bit in. So it really was we worked so well in creating this ad. Now, I've never worked like that across other mediums before, in magazines and digital, and I'm not bagging those, by the way. They are great mediums. I just think there is something unique about the way we work with advertisers across podcasts.
Yeah, definitely. I love that example. So, Polly, can you talk about the role that podcast advertising plays in your broader media mix when it comes to Audible?
Yeah. So obviously it's some of the parts, so it's an element of our broader media plan, but I think it plays a really important role in terms of being able to find those audiences that are centred around specific genres or specific passion points, and I think they would probably be quite expensive to find in some other mediums. So for us, it's around, if we've got a particular genre that we're trying to promote, for example, health and wellbeing with Felicity's podcast, it just makes sense for us to really tap into the podcast audience. I think the other interesting thing about podcasting is that unlike other traditional mediums, it's not, it's not related to age or demographic necessarily. It's not bought on day part. So you can kind of work around those things where you're kind of held to specific buying types with other mediums.
Yeah, definitely. Fliss, Healthyish is almost always sold out. It is one of our most popular podcasts. Why do you think we see that demand for Healthyish?
Because it's such a fantastic podcast.
It is.
Well, I think obviously health and wellbeing is so hot right now. Health is almost a status symbol, and I think advertisers want to buy into this, whether you're into audiobooks or whether you're... I was just trying to think of some other random kind of ads we've had on their Priceline or whoever it may be, but... healthy is the place to be, and yes, we're sold out, so thank you, ad team. And actually, was it last year or 18 months ago, my boss came to me and said, we're always sold out, we need to do something else, we need another podcast, why don't we do an extra Healthyish? So we did, and so now we actually have 2 off the Healthyish brand. I think the other thing as well, obviously, we're aligned to Body and Soul. That's such a respected brand. It has a long history. We fill our podcast with experts and people who are trusted, and I'm very brand focused. Is it on brand? And especially, and with the ad team as well, they'll come to me and say, look, we want to do an ad about, I don't know, vaginas or something to do with vaginas. And sorry, I'm just so used to being in this world of health and women. And I was like, well, no, we can't do that. That's not on brand. So I think they give me they fill me with confidence that I can push back and say, no, that's not on brand. So I do feel like a brand custodian, and they respect that. And I think that builds trust with advertisers.
Yeah, I think with advertisers and the audience that they're going to hear ads that are relevant to them. So not only read by the host, but feels like it fits in within the content. And we also, with Extra Healthyish, we felt that we could launch within that community that already existed. So we've got 2 podcasts. They can both be sponsored, but they're different content across the 2, and the ability to engage the audience and give them more back when we've seen through the research that people are listening more and more was a no-brainer for us. Polly, another question for you. More than 60% of people have said they've bought a product that they heard advertised in a podcast. Why do you think that is?
Not a surprising stat, and I think what that comes down to is the trust that you place in those podcast hosts and the role that they play in your lives. And I think if the advertising is done in a really authentic way, then it really resonates and converts to sales. I think I've definitely been sucked in, for lack of a better term, to things that have been advertised to me, whether that be through podcasts or influencers, etc. I think I bought one of those face mask things that are supposed to make you look 10 years younger, because Laura
like
Byrne.
It's working.
Yeah, I don't yet look like my LinkedIn profile picture. But yes, I think it comes down to what we were speaking to at the beginning around making sure that advertising is authentic. And I think if it is, then you place that trust and yeah, it works.
Yeah, and I think tailoring that messaging, again, what we saw in the research, it works really well, and thinking about what works across podcasting or what works across radio, works across streaming can be quite different depending on what the content and the audience is. We'll finish with one last question for Fliss. Can you tell us a little bit more about the integration that we do with advertisers on Healthyish? I know we've touched on a couple of things, but I know you wanted to talk a little bit around the kind of less church and state, around that authentic and brand custodian side of things.
Yeah, I think in my experience, there's less church and state in podcasts, and often, I'll have a guest on, and then they later become an ambassador for a brand, and then the brand will come to me and say, hey, we'd love to advertise. And I haven't really experienced that before, so I think we work a bit more collaborative together in creating these ads, and often I'll have a go at the script, because if I'm reading it, I want it to sound like it's actually coming from me, and I believe in what we're advertising and selling to our listeners. So I find that it's most of the time, a really lovely organic experience. And I feel kind of in control in a weird way, that I can actually, I want to believe in what we are providing to our listeners, because they are very engaged. They keep coming back. Our metrics are going up, and I just don't want to ruin that special bond I've got with them.
Yeah, it is that one-to-one relationship that we have with the audience through podcasting. I think that's our time, but thank you to both of you for joining us. Hopefully that's given you some ideas of how you can integrate your advertisers or your clients more into podcasting, and thinking around how we can create that authentic content and relationship. Thanks so much.